Hi class. In this video we'll be covering sound and how to add a sound file into a P5 sketch. Some different manipulations that we can do with the sound. So it's very similar to adding an image. We'll be adding an external file. So first we'll go over some different sources to find sounds that use the Creative Commons license. And then we'll look at the code that we can use to add sound into our project. So let's get started. I'm going to open up GitHub and make sure I'm on the MMP 210 repository, make sure I'm up to date. And I'm going to click Show in Finder. And I'm going to make a new project here. So we finished the self-portrait and the meme projects. Over the next couple of weeks, we are going to do a new project, a sound sampler, where we'll play different sounds using keyboard input and mouse clicks. To get started, I'm just going to create a new folder and call this sound version 1. And I'm going to copy and paste my style and index and P5 libraries from another folder, just so I have those ready to go. I'll make some changes to those. And then I'm going to drag the entire MMP 210 folder over to Sublime Text. So I'll start with sound version 1. And I'm going to open up index.html and just increase the size a bit there and call this sound version 1. And for the header, I'll say sound sampler version 1. For now, we'll remove those instructions. Everything else looks good. And since I have my sketch attached, that's what we're going to create. So let's open our project in the browser first. I'm going to start the Sublime server, open up a new window, and go to localhost 8080, choose MMP210. So my links haven't been added to the portfolio page yet, so I'm just going to do sound v1 in my browser. So far, we don't see anything. I haven't added the sketch yet. I'm just going to open the console just so we have that ready. And then we can get ready. So there's one change that we need to make on the index page, and that's with our script tag. So for all of our projects so far, we've just relied on the P5 library on its own. But the sound part of P5 is actually not built into the basic library, so we need to download a separate add-on. So I'm going to go to the browser and go to P5.js and go to libraries. And we can see the example that they show actually involves the sound library. So we're going to download the P5 sound library, so I'll click here. The download link is a little bit hard to find. It's a little bit down the page, and then you click the link here. And that links to the actual file on GitHub. So the easiest way to get this is to go to raw, and then sometimes that'll download directly into your browser, or sometimes it'll open up a page like this. If you see a page like this, you can just save it. So I'm going to save this to the downloads folder, and then I can click Show in Finder, and we can see the downloads folder and my sound v1 project. So I'm just going to drag that guy in there. If it downloads directly when you click on it, then you can just go to your downloads folder and get it from there. I'll also include a link to this file in the description of the video. So once I have the sound library downloaded, I should see it over here in my files. And I just have to add a new script tag in here. It should go directly below the p5.min.js and above the sketch.js. So the order here is important because the P5 sound library relies on the P5 library already being loaded, and the sketch eventually is going to rely on the sound library being loaded. So we do have to make sure those files are in the correct order. Let's get some sounds to play before we get started with our sketch. There's a few different places where you can get sound on the web that's Creative Commons licensed. One is freesound.org. This website, freesound.org, requires that you log in to download the sounds, but you can preview the sounds before you log in. So if you find a sound that you like, you can register and get an account and then log in and download the sounds. A lot of the sounds on freesound.org are user supplied sounds and hobbyists. You can find a lot of things like field recordings. So if you want some birds chirping, You can sample them, and then if you want to download it, let's try another one. So if you choose one that you like, you can click on the file. It'll give you some information about the sound. So you can see that it's a WAV file, it's 7 seconds long, it's 1.2 megabytes, which is relatively small. The sample rate and bit depth have to do with the quality of the sound, and stereo channels mean that there's 2 channels. So if you like the sound, you can click the download button and it will download into your downloads folder. Usually they have very long names, so you might want to change the name to birds or something like that. Another good source for sounds on the web is the Free Music Archive. These are mostly user submitted and full tracks of music rather than field recordings. So if we go to search FMA, we can choose different genres. I might choose electronic and choose a subgenre, and then you can preview the songs. So if you like a song that you hear, you can click the download button. You can see the Creative Commons license. The song is free to use under specific conditions. We can read what those conditions are. And then we can click download. And that will download to the downloads folder. So you can see that there. Again, it has a very long file name, so you might want to make that a bit shorter if you do decide to use that sound. Another site that I like to use is jfxr. jfxr is a JavaScript tool for generating sound effects for video games and other things, and it has a few different types. So you can play around with those. There's a lot of settings here, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of the nice features here is if I choose a sound, I can click the mutate button and it'll give me a different version of that sound. So instead of tweaking all the settings manually, I can just click mutate and play with it until I get something that I like. Once I have a sound that I do like, let's try it. I can click export and it will download the file for me. You'll notice that it has a space in the name, explosion space 3. Typically we want to get rid of that space, so you could put a dash there or an underscore. You could also rename the file entirely. A couple other sources I'll show real quick is Wikimedia. The WikiMedia Commons has lots of different types of media. We can specifically click on sounds and then look at different sounds that are categorized in various ways. You can preview sounds, and if you like something, you can click on it. Scroll down to download one of the copies of it. Finally, archive.org is another place where you can find Creative Commons licensed media. You could click on audio and look at the different files. And you can download different versions. So those are a few different options. I'll link to those in the description. I'm going to work with a few sounds that I downloaded, including the explosion from FMXR, some chickens that I downloaded from freesound.org, and this background music, which is from Free Music Archive. So I'm going to throw those into my folder just so I have those available, and then get started. So to load a sound, so first we need to create our sketch file. So I'm going to make a new file and save this as sketch.js. And I'll make a comment. This is my sound sampler version 1. And just like our image files, to load a sound, we need first to create a global variable that will be a reference to that sound. So for my explosion, I'm going to say var explosion sound. And then I need to preload that sound before I try to draw anything on the page. So I'm going to say function preload. With the sound library, loaded, I have a new function called load sound. So I'm going to say explosion sound gets load sound. And just like my image, I'm going to give the path to the sound, which is just the file name since we are in the same folder. And I have to be very careful to make sure that the spelling and capitalizations are the same. And so that's a WAV file. So now I can set up the rest of my sketch. I'll have function setup, create canvas, 640 by 360, and function draw. And let's just draw a background for now. So one thing that you should be aware of is that if I try to play a sound before the user has done anything, the browser will actually not let me do that. So if I say explosion sound and .play, which is how we would play the sound, we're going to see that this will not work. So over here, I can see that there are some warnings. It says the audio context was not allowed to start. Because of various restrictions on the way that a browser works, we don't want media to be able to auto-play to prevent things like pop-up ads and videos on a website. And so in Chrome and the other browsers, if you don't make some sort of interaction, then the sound won't play. So to play a sound, we can use our mouse pressed function. We can say function mouse pressed, and then we can move our explosion sound.play in there. And now we should be able to hear the sound. I am seeing an error over here, which I'm not familiar with, but the sound does appear to be working, so we can ignore that for now. We can hear the sound playing every time I click the screen. So let's look at the sound library a bit more and see what else we can do with our sounds. So I'm going to go back to the P5 website and go back to libraries and click on P5 sound. And here we can see all the various functions that are related to the sound. So this is kind of like the reference for the rest of the P5 library, but just for our sound. So we're using a sound file. We can see the example here, and then we can see some of the methods. Play is how we play the sound file. We can also pause. We can loop the sound file. We can check to see if the sound file is playing or is paused. We can stop the sound file. We can set the volume of the sound file. We can set the pan, which is whether it plays out of the right or left or both speakers. The playback rate. We can learn the duration of the sound file and its current time. We can jump to different parts of the sound file, and we can get information about the channels, the sample rate, and a whole bunch of other things that get more technical. One thing that can be really useful is the isPlaying function. If I want to see what that looks like, I can say text explosion sound.isPlaying, and this will just print out whether or not this explosion sound is playing. So I'm just going to put that in the upper left corner of our sketch, and I'll make the text size a bit bigger just so we can see that. And so if I reload the sketch, you can see that it's going to be false unless I'm playing the sound, in which case it becomes true. And so if we want to use some kind of visual to correspond with the sound, we can use the explosion.isPlaying to add that visual. So I can use an if statement and put that inside here. So explosion sound.isPlaying. And so isPlaying is a method. That's why it has parentheses at the end, or a function. And it just returns either a true or false value. So when it's true, since it's an explosion, let's draw like a red background. I'll say background is red. And I'll delete these guys for now. So we can change the visual elements of our scene based on what is happening with the sound, so we can correlate for the user the relationship between sound and visuals, which is very important for all sorts of different applications like video games and other things where we want the sound and the visuals to correspond to reinforce each other. So let's try playing a background sound now. And so I'm going to load a new sound that's a music track, so it's a bit longer. So I'm going to say variable BG sound. And then I'm going to load my background music. So I'm going to say bg sound equals load sound. And I called this background.mp3. So I'm going to remove my code for the explosion sound for the moment. Now we're going to use some logic to play and pause our background sound. So for the mouse press, let's start with just playing the sound. So I'll say bg sound.play. So we can see when I click the canvas, the sound will play. But if I want to stop the sound or pause the sound, I can't do that. If I want to stop the sound, I could say bg.stop, but then it will, it'll only work one way or the other. So what I can do is use the isPlaying method to determine whether the sound is playing first, and then play or pause the sound based on that. So first I'll say if bg sound dot is playing. If that's true, then I want to pause the sound. So I'm going to say .pause. Else, then we'll play. So if the bg sound is not playing, then we're going to do play. And if it is playing, if this is true, then we'll do pause. So let's listen to that again. So it plays and pauses. The difference between pause and stop is that pause will keep our place in the sound. So if I change this to stop, we'll hear that it starts from the beginning again. So that's play. And then it will start from the beginning again. So let's change that back to pause. And let's visualize a couple things going on with our sound. So first, if the sound is playing, let's just visualize that in the background. So if bg sound.is playing, then let's change the background color. This time let's try plum. So now we can visualize whether or not the sound is playing. You could use an image or a shape or anything else to visualize that as well. We can also visualize how much of the sound has played by using the current time method. We'll have to map. We have the current time, which tells us how far the sound is played, and we also know the duration, or how long the sound is. So we can map those values to something spatial or visual. So let's just draw a rectangle based on those values. We are going to, first let's get the current time. So we'll say variable current time equals bg sound.current time. Then we can get the duration, bg sound.duration. And I'm putting these in variables just so it's a little bit easier to read, because our map function is going to get very long. So then let's create a variable for the time elapsed, how much time has passed, and we'll map from the current time, and the range of time starts at 0 and goes to the duration, so that's how much time there is in the song. And then we'll map that from 0 to width, the width of our canvas. Let's then draw a rectangle, so I'm going to change the fill to gold, and I'm going to say no stroke. I'm going to draw a rectangle from 0 on the left, and let's put it at the bottom of the screen. So I'll say height minus, let's try 100. And then I'll draw it as far as time has elapsed. So I'll say time elapsed for the width. And for the height, I'll just put 100 so it fills up the bottom of the screen. So let's try that again and see if that works. So of course, if I'm not playing the sound, it's not progressing. Now we can see the width of our rectangle is starting to move across the screen. And if I pause, then the current time is no longer changing, and so the file stops playing. We can also change the volume of the sound using the setVolume method. I'm going to use the mouse Y as a way to update the sound. So I'm going to create a variable vol, and I'm going to map mouse Y from 0 to height, and then from 0 to 1. So the lowest volume a sound can be is 0, the highest volume a sound can be is 1. And then I'll set the volume. So I'll say bg sound.volume. So I'll say bg sound.set volume to vol. Now in this case, when I play the sound, it's very quiet if I go to the top of the canvas where 0 is, and it gets louder as I go to the bottom of the canvas. So you might think that seems counterintuitive, that I have to go down with the mouse, so we can reverse that range. So let's go from 1 to 0. Now, if I'm up at the top, we can hear that. If I go farther down, then the volume goes down. We can visualize this as well. If I draw another rectangle, and I'll draw this one from 0 and mouse Y, and then I'll draw it all the way across to width, and then height. Now you can see the volume. So now we can see the full volume versus the lower volume. So we can change the volume. We can also pan the sound. So panning refers to the stereo. It's going to be difficult to hear on this recording, but if you use headphones when you're doing this on your own project, you'll be able to hear it better. So I'm going to create another variable, this time for pan. And I'm going to set that equal to, so this is pan left and right. So I'm going to set the pan, I'm going to map this time mouse X, and I'm going to map from 0 to width, and the pan can go from -1, which is all the way to the left, so -1, and 1 is all the way to the right. So typically it's going to be 0 right in the middle, so it'll be playing equally out of each speaker. So now we can move it across the stereo. So I'm going to say bg sound.pan, and then put in the pan value there. So you might be able to hear it slightly coming out of my computer speakers. But if you try it on headphones, the effect will be much more obvious. I am getting some warnings when I go out the side. So one way to fix that, it doesn't want me to go above or below 1 or -1. So if I just add the optional risk constrain argument to my map function, then it won't allow it to go past the values that I set as the min and max. So that'll get rid of that warning. So the pan is a little bit hard to hear, so I'm going to take this out for now. But try that on your own and see if that is something you want to work with. What I'm going to change this to now is I'm going to change the rate that the music is playing. So I'm going to say variable rate equals map mouse X from 0 to width. And so the rate is how fast the music is playing. I can't go to 0 because I'll get an error there, but I can go very slow. So I could go to something like 0.25. And the faster I go, the faster the music will be. So I can go really high, but I don't want to go too crazy. So I'll just try something like 3. And I'll also restrict this one so I can avoid getting errors, because if I do play the music at 0, that's going to create some issues. So then I'll change the rate. So I'll say bg sound.rate, and I'll put that rate value in there. And so now what we'll see is the music playing much faster or slower. So we can get some cool effects there. This is the music playing almost at 0.25. It's moving very, very slow. And there we see it playing very, very fast. So we can get some kind of fun effects playing with that. Let's visualize that as well. So instead of a rectangle here, let's use a line. So I'll make a stroke. So I'll do the stroke as blue. I'll say stroke weight is, let's say, 10. And then let's just draw a line at mouse X, and from 0 at the top, and mouse X to height at the bottom. And so now we'll just see where the rate is. So that way we can have a visual to correspond with what we hear in the sound. So that's just a small sample of everything that we can do with our sounds. In the next video, we'll add keyboard input, which will allow us to play different sounds with different keys on the keyboard. And so we'll go over how to make that work. And then that will eventually lead towards creating a sound sampler where we combine visuals with different sounds to give the user the ability to create sort of a sound collage. So that's it for this video. I'm going to go over to GitHub and just commit this. I'm not going to add a link quite yet because I want to add a link to the second example that I'm going to make instead of this one. So I'm just going to commit this as an example so the code will be available. So this is the add sound version 1 example. I'm going to commit to master and push to the origin. So that code will be available, but I'm not going to add a link there because this is just an example. In the next video, I'll add the link for that one.